Rising gas price, increasing heating costs. Who is to blame for causing the current high energy price in the United States and around the globe? OPEC and Russia, or someone else?
I don't understand these current policies. It just seems to drive up price. I think some people in the policy world want oil and gas prices to go up, so it makes the competition with something like a solar panel or a windmill look better.
Is renewable clean energy the solution for energy shortage and saving the planet?
Somewhere between 80 and 85% of the energy consumed on this planet comes from fossil fuels, oil, coal, and natural gas. And that they can project out to 2050, 2060, and that number is going to be about 70%. With all the renewables that you can throw at it, you're going to reduce it by maybe 10%.
And what would be the consequence if we go down with this route of depending on the renewable energy?
You're now going to benefit the Chinese Communist government on production of solar panels. And so they're going to get that money that nobody else on the planet's going to get. So why do you want to do that? Why do you want to prop them up?
Welcome to the Wei and Cathy show. I'm your host, Cathy Zhang. In this episode, I will continue my interview with Jerry Simmons, the president and CEO of DEPA, Domestic Energy Producers Alliance. DEPA is a grassroots organization representing domestic oil and gas producers, service companies, and mineral royalty owners. In other words, they represent the individual and the independent smaller energy companies in the U.S. Mind you, about 85% of the oil drills in the United States is done by these independent smaller companies, and 3/4 of the mineral estates in the United States are owned by individuals. So they are a very important part of the energy industry. So in the first half of the interview, we discussed the reasons for the U.S. and the global energy crisis and how it's impacting the general public in the U.S. So next, we'll talk about the solutions. So Jerry, I asked Jerry, many people believe that the new renewable clean energy is the solution to the energy shortage and also can save the planet. So how does Jerry think?
The worldview on what's happening with energy policies right now, when you look at the solutions that will come out of Glasgow and what President Biden and others say is, well, we need to go to greens, to renewables. And today, what that means is solar and wind. And it also means electric vehicles. And they'll say, well, this is what we have to do. And again, the U.S. government will say, if you're going to provide solar panels to government facilities, they have to come from American manufacturers. America only manufactures 3% of the solar panels. The Chinese government manufactures 70%. Most of the rare earth minerals that are required for the lithium-ion batteries in things like electric vehicles and the guts, if you will, in solar panels and windmills, those rare earths are basically controlled by the Chinese Communist government, not by us, not by friendly countries that want the world to benefit from the use of those, but the cobalt manufacturing with child forced labor is just one example, and that's well documented. I'm not telling stories out of school here. That's something that's well documented, and why our government chooses to go along with that, I have no idea.
As Jerry pointed out, with the Green New Deal portion of the budget reconciliation process that's going on right now in the Congress, it is requiring that the solar panels that federal agencies going to buy have to be made in the United States. But as Jerry said, U.S. only manufactures 3% of the solar panels around the globe, and China manufactures 70%. Then how the government would expect to implement its plan?
I don't know what you're going to do about that. 70% of solar panels are produced in China. And again, of the necessary materials to build those solar panels, the Chinese government owns the bulk of that across the globe. And even where we have the ability to mine that, for example, in Nevada, there's some significant lithium deposits that some folks have wanted to get leases for, to go in and mine those, and they have met with nothing but opposition.
Oh, what kind of opposition? And when Jerry said that the Chinese government actually owns the most of the necessary materials to build solar panels, is it because that we just don't have them in the United States, or because of other reasons?
The lithium mine in Nevada is a great example where we know there's a good deposit there. It's just getting it permitted and being able to go extract it. And we do have other lithium sources in this country. As a matter of fact, some of the oil and gas production around the country, there's a lot of produced water that comes up with extracted oil and gas, and that water gets pumped back down into the ground. There's lithium associated with some of that, and there's some technologies out there that have been, experimented with to extract that. But for the most part, no. You have to look elsewhere. The Congo, I think, is the number one producer of cobalt, and that's, those are terrible pictures for anybody to look at. Children working in dirt mines, hauling bags of rock out so that they can be processed for the cobalt. It's sad and it's shocking, and it should bother anybody living in this country. But other precious minerals, I don't know when it comes to the copper. We used to have significant copper reserves in some of our northern states. I think there's probably still a lot of that, but it's being mined elsewhere, because of regulatory policies that are or being put in place in this country that make it more difficult. So, it's one of those things you just say, okay, the green people want all of these things to benefit the planet, and they won't allow them. They won't nuclear plants. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking that maybe California's not going to close Diablo Canyon like they say they're going to. I think they're going to need that electricity for a while. But nuclear plants, if you're concerned about the planet, if you're concerned about emissions, once a nuclear plant is up and running, there's no emissions from those. So why don't we install a lot of nuclear plants around the country?
And Jerry also pointed out the impact of what the Chinese government has been doing, who was absent from the COP26 conference.
So they say they're not going to do anything. They're going to keep building coal plants. They're going to keep doing what they're doing. They'll export solar panels and that kind of technology where they need to, but they're not going to change their growth in manufacturing and otherwise until beyond 2030 or 2050. And again, if you're concerned about that type of stuff worldwide, and the citizens of California are apparently very concerned about those things. That's why they keep voting to pay more taxes to save the planet. Then why aren't they talking to the Chinese government about that? Why aren't they concerned about that? If you're going to impose policies in this country on the American citizens that require certain industries prosper and that others don't, and understand that you're now going to benefit the Chinese Communist government on production of solar panels. And so they're going to get that money that nobody else on the planet's going to get. So why do you want to do that? Why do you want to prop them up? Why not have a reliable energy source like oil and natural gas produced in this country, where we have the heaviest regulations in the world? We have the cleanest produced oil and natural gas in the world from a regulatory standpoint. And like I said earlier, we already know by EPA's measurements that our air is cleaner, our water is cleaner in this country than it was when I was a child here. So we know how to do it right, and we've reduced our CO2 emissions. Why not do it here instead of encouraging other countries to pick that up and do it instead of us?
Then people would ask, if we have to rely on out-of-country energy resources, especially on China, it would give the Chinese Communist government a lot of leverage. So why our government wants to impose such policy, and how do our domestic energy producers feel about that?
That's a great question. If I could answer that question, I think I would probably just retire and be done. That's a great question. But it actually all comes down to policy, and was a policy of President Biden. Before he became president, when he was still on the campaign trail, there's a very famous video of him talking to a young woman, probably about 11, 12 years old, where she had asked some question about, fossil fuels. He got the microphone and got right in front of her and said, "Listen to me carefully. I promise I am going to end fossil fuels.
I guarantee you, we're going to end fossil fuel, and I am not going to cooperate." So
he believed that before he became president. The policies that he's putting in place since he became president, I find it curious myself personally that a member of the government, whether it's the president or a member of Congress or whatever, wants the federal government to be punitive in its reaction to a certain industry in this country. And that's how we feel we're being treated, that it's punitive, that they want to punish us, the oil and gas industry, for providing the necessary items that enable our modern day life. There was a hearing last week in Congress where the chairwoman of the congressional committee was hammering these oil and gas CEOs about what they do and wanted them to admit that they were destroying the planet and, all of that kind of stuff. And I just think to myself, if I were on that panel, I would respectfully answer as many questions as I could. But I think I would say, well gee whiz, Madam Chairwoman, what do you think the appropriate CO2 level is for the planet? What's the appropriate temperature for the planet? I'm an old geologist by training, and I know a little about the history of this planet. And for the most part, for 4 billion years, it's been much hotter than it is right now, up to 10 degrees hotter than it is right now, 10 degrees Celsius hotter than it is right now. And CO2 has been way up and it's been way down. Right now, we're in one of the lowest CO2 measured times in the history of the planet, at 430 parts per million or something like that. It was down to about 280 parts per million. And again, basic high school science teaches at 150 parts per million, green plants stop growing. And if green plants stop growing, there's no more oxygen, because that's where we get our oxygen from. So we stop growing as well. So we know 150 is not a good number. We know in the past it's been 7,000 parts per million, and life flourished on the planet. So what's the right number? I would ask those questions of policymakers right now. Say, well, you seem to have all the answers, so what's the right answer? And why are you imposing punitive restrictions on an industry? Why does the federal government want to pick winners and losers in an industrial category where it doesn't in others? They don't go say, we believe that this singer is the best, and so you should go buy their records. They let the market decide that. Why they do that in energy, I wish I could answer your question better. Sorry.
So Jerry obviously has talked to a lot of lawmakers. So for those who support this type of green policies that he referred to, what's their rationale?
I think there are those people, and I trust them that their beliefs are sincere. There are people in this country and around the world that truly believe that our production of CO2 is raising the temperature of the planet, and it's going to harm us. The idea that CO2 is a greenhouse gas and that it is contributing to an increase in temperature of the planet, that's probably true. Is it a crisis? No. And like I said, as a geologist, I can go back for hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of years and look at the temperature of the planet, and it was much hotter than it is right now for the most part. And it's been much colder than it is right now as well. I think there are people that really believe that, though, that they think that we as humans are harming the planet. So they believe that something should be done about that. And again, my comment is, okay, fine. But solar panels and windmills won't get us there. They cannot replace the energy we have now.
Why is that?
The Energy Information Administration in this country and the International Energy Administration both have numbers that show currently somewhere between 80 and 85% of the energy consumed on this planet comes from fossil fuels, oil, coal, and natural gas. And that they can project out to 2050, 2060, and that number is going to be about 70%. With all the renewables that you can throw at it, you're going to reduce it by maybe 10%. So the fossil fuels are still going to be there. So I don't understand these current policies. It just seems to drive up price. I think some people in the policy world want oil and gas prices to go up, so it makes the competition with something like a solar panel or a windmill look better. Where it's so much cheaper to have a natural gas plant than it is to have a solar farm, for example. So, and again, I really don't want to question somebody's motives, the policymakers' motives. I believe them when they say they're concerned about that. They're concerned that their grandkids aren't going to be able to, live in a clean world and all that. I just say I don't believe they're looking at the evidence that's really and truly in front of them, and the UN numbers that they want to quote, the model runs that project the climate out. It's been proven that's not the observation that we have. So when you look at the model runs and you look at the real world observations, what the increase in temperature is much lower than that. So I think there's some hysteria attached to it. There's also, and I don't want to appear to be a conspiracy theorist, but I do believe that there are some political folks that use an issue like that as political control. So if you can scare people, if you make them concerned about something and you put fear in them, then you can get them to vote your way. I know a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., and he said there's two things. You give me anger and give me fear, and I can get a voter to do anything I want. And if I get both of them, they're going to agree with me every time. So I think there's some of that in there as well.
And so nowadays, people talk a lot about following science, and what we hear is about how those science studies prove there is a global warming or climate change, and human activities caused all of those. So why such point of views is dominating while the views like Jerry's and DEPA's, their organizations, are not easy to come across to the general public?
You hear the number all the time. It's a consensus about global warming and that we're causing it, and 97% of scientists say this and all. And again, I can point you to places all over where that's been debunked over and over again. That original study came out of New Zealand 10 plus years ago. It's all a bunch of nonsense, that kind of thing. Science is not about consensus, okay? Consensus is something you get in religion. Okay? Science is about asking questions and having provable data points in the real world. And if you can't replicate that through other experiments, then you have to go back to the drawing board. That's how you do science. So when people say, well, you've got to believe this, well, science is not a belief system. That's not how it works. So getting people to understand that, I've got relatives that I'll have these conversations with, and they know me and they trust me, but they've heard it so often, and especially kids, they've heard it so often from the media and from their teachers and from textbooks that they don't really understand where energy comes from. They don't get the full picture. They don't realize what happens when you flip on a light switch. The idea that you can just do away with fossil fuels, you can do away with oil and gas in this country. I like to point out if I'm in an auditorium giving a talk to a few hundred people, I like to say, okay, somebody point to something in this room, anything in this room that wasn't somehow or other impacted by fossil fuels. Just anything. Pick anything in the room that you believe had no impact, not touched by fossil fuels. And, sometimes somebody will say, well, what about this or what about that? And they'll point to something and I'll say, how did it get in the room? It had to get there for transportation by fossil fuels, if nothing else. If fossil fuels didn't have anything to do with the manufacture of it, again, let's go back to the conversation about windmills and solar panels. It takes an incredible amount of fossil fuels to generate those things. They don't just appear. The solar panels that are building in China don't just happen. There's a lot of silica that's involved in making those, and the metals that are involved in that. Those are extractive industries, and you have to use a lot of machines and a lot of heat to do those things. A commercial windmill will have tons of reinforced rebar in it. That's steel. Steel comes from coal that's fired in a kiln. And that's how we make it. We don't know any other way to do it. Has tons and tons of concrete. Concrete has to be fired. It's limestone that you fire. I mean, it's just amazing the amount of energy that goes into making those things. And that energy comes from fossil fuels.
And the current administration blame OPEC and Russia for the current high oil price and has pleaded for the help from OPEC got rejected. So how does Jerry think of that?
President Biden, he doesn't need to make those long distance calls to Russia and to Saudi Arabia. He can call us if he wants. He does what he can, and this administration has done what they can to prevent domestic U.S. production. And then they turn right around because gasoline prices are going up, and elections that occurred this week didn't go so well for that political party. They're now asking not our allies, but some of our adversaries, if they would provide us with more petroleum products, which is absurd. Why did he call us? It's not a long distance call, as the chairman of my board of directors said in an interview this week. It's not a long distance call to call us. We're right here, and we're happy to work with the U.S. government and other governments, other allies around the world, to provide the energy that we all need.
So to summarize Jerry's points about why the energy price increase, on one hand, it's because the policy impact limiting the fossil fuel production in the United States. And on the other hand, some people allowed it to happen so that the fossil fuel appears to be more expensive than the renewable energies. So I wanted to ask Jerry, is that a reasonable assessment?
Yeah, I agree. And like I said earlier, I believe there are some policymakers that's how they think, is that if we drive up the price of gasoline, of natural gas, of electricity that's being provided by oil, gas, or coal, and make that cost more than when we demand that the utilities and others start putting in commercial solar farms and wind farms, that now makes them look more competitive. It makes it look like a more fair playing field, when in fact it's all artificial and it was propped up by the government.
Really appreciate, Jerry, you providing all the information. So yeah, anything, if one thing you would like our audience to take away, what would that be?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thanks, for anybody that's listening in, and I really appreciate it. And I'll just say, don't believe me. Okay, do some research on your own. Everything that I have said here is verifiable. And we're very concerned as an industry. We're not just concerned about our livelihood and what we do and the jobs that we provide. It's the tax base. The U.S. government makes billions of dollars a year off of the oil and gas that is produced on federal lands. The states where that occurs, they make billions of dollars. Texas and New Mexico have had surplus budgets for several years now because of all of the oil that's being produced in West Texas and eastern New Mexico. So the impacts are huge across the country. So I just, for any of the folks that watch your program, I would encourage them to educate themselves when it comes to the issues, especially folks that live out in California. Don't just believe the California legislature and your governor. Do some research on your own. Look up the facts. And, government statistics are great. Most of everything I quote, I get from the Energy Information Administration, NOAA, NASA. There's great information out there for you to glean and understand what's really going on. And us oil and gas guys aren't the bad guys. We're the ones that have there's a guy named Alex Epstein that wrote a book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And he talks about the planet. I'm going to get his quote wrong, but it's something like, we humans aren't taking a good planet or a comfortable planet and making it worse, which is what's going on in Scotland right now, what they want you to believe. But we have taken a hostile planet and made it so that we can live in every corner of it. There's humans from the North Pole to the South Pole on every continent, in every climate zone, and we flourish. And it's because of our technology, and that's how we get things done.
Indeed, the high energy price is obviously impacting everybody's life, not only the price at the pump, but like electricity, food, clothing, and traveling, etc. So what has to happen for things to change? I asked Jerry, and he told me that on their part, they will just keep doing what they have been doing for past 12 years. Including talking to the Congress representatives and educating the policymakers. And he said a few days ago, the organization DEPA launched a TV and digital ads with the theme of No Surrender.
Stop surrendering. Reverse the punitive policies now. Produce more American oil and natural gas.
And we just do stuff like that as best we can and try to educate people. But all of the press that is coming out of Scotland right now with the COP26, and it's all this doom and gloom, and we've got to do this or we're all going to die. We've been hearing this for 20 years that they've been having. This is COP26, so they have 26 of these things where they just keep doing this and saying we've got to do something, and doom and gloom. If you go back into the 1989, I think, or 1990. They said, if we don't do this in 10 years, this is going to happen. Well, it didn't happen. So if we don't do this in 10 years, this is going to happen. So we just keep hammering it home and saying, if you want the lights to be on, if you want to stay warm in winter and cool in the summer, well, let us do our job.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jerry. Yeah.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Let us do our job. So this is the voice from the folks at the fossil fuel industry. They believe they can supply adequate energy to the United States and even to other countries, but just let them do their job. And they wish the government can do its job, which is to get out of their way so that, general public won't have to suffer this high price. How do you think of Jerry's points? And what do you think? What has to happen for things to change? And what can you do? Please let us know. And I appreciate that you've been with us and leaving all your comments there, sharing what you think. So, please share our video if you like it. And really appreciate everyone who stick with us to learn about more truth, and we'll continue strive to do that. All right, that's it for today. Thank you again for watching, and see you next time. Take care. Bye bye.